The keypad blinked red. Twice. Vanessa Boyd turned to the crowd behind her, Julian, 2 investors, a dozen guests, and raised her voice. "You are not my husband anymore. Open this gate." On the second-floor balcony, André Boyd said nothing. Walter Grady stepped out and folded his hands behind his back. Amara stood behind her father, holding her camcorder. André spoke once. "The day you ended this marriage, you gave up the right to walk through that door." Vanessa smiled and lifted a blue folder. Nobody in that driveway knew what was inside it. 7 months earlier, the house on Kestrel Ridge was quiet and André Boyd was already awake. At 5 in the morning, he walked the same route he had walked for 14 years. Front door, kitchen door, the glass slider to the pool deck, the side entrance by the garage that no one had used since the year they moved in. He tested each handle with 2 fingers, the same half-turn every time, waiting to feel the bolt hold before he moved on. Amara had given it a name when she was 6. Dad's Patrol. She thought it was a joke, and he had never corrected her. By 6, he was in the kitchen with a pan of milk on low heat and a jar of honey open beside it. His daughter would not drink it cold and would not drink it hot. And somewhere in the 11 years he had been her father, he had learned the exact point between the two. He poured it into the blue mug she had picked out herself at a gas station in Savannah, set it at her place, and sat down with a stack of site reports. His phone lit up at 6:15. It was a publicist apologizing for the hour, saying that a business magazine wanted 40 minutes with him for a feature on Southern developers. André read the same paragraph of a soil survey 3 times while she talked. Then he told her no, thanked her, and asked her not to send the follow-up email she was clearly about to send. The magazine ran the piece anyway 10 days later without him. It ran with Vanessa on the cover instead. She looked extraordinary. That was the first thing he thought, and he thought it without any complication at all because it was true. She stood in the doorway of the Vessel and Company flagship, in a white coat, chin up and across her shoulder, ran the line the editors had chosen from 90 minutes of conversation. "I built all of it myself." André read the article at the kitchen island with his coat still on. When he finished, he folded the magazine closed and left it face up on the counter where she would see that he had read it. Then he drove to a newsstand on Peachtree and bought 3 more copies because in 1997, his mother had thrown out the only newspaper that ever printed his name, and he had promised himself he would never let a thing like that disappear again. He put all 3 in the bottom drawer of his desk in the office where the framed foreclosure notice hung. It had not always been that way between them, and this is the part people got wrong later. 2010. There had been a night when a deal on a warehouse conversion was going to close or was going to kill him, and Vanessa had sat in the passenger seat of his truck in a parking lot outside Marietta from 11 at night until the call came at 4 in the morning. She did not talk. She did not tell him it would be fine. She peeled an orange and handed him half of it, section by section, for 5 hours. When the call came, and it was yes, she cried before he did. That warehouse paid for the land on Kestrel Ridge. 2019. Vessel and Company had exploded that year, and Vanessa paid for the entire renovation herself, $1.2 million, and she signed every contractor agreement in her own name because she wanted it done her way and done fast. She chose the stone. She chose the light fixtures in the stairwell that cost more than André's first car. Around that time, she started saying my house instead of our house, and he noticed, and he decided it was a small thing, and he let it go. And then this past February, at a dinner with 2 of their oldest partners, she had stopped noticing that she did it at all. André started telling the story of the Halloran family, how the first institutional capital Boyd Meridian ever raised had come through a dinner Vanessa arranged in 2017, how she had spent a week learning what old Atlanta money liked to talk about, so he would not have to. That money was what turned a company of 1 man with a truck into a company with a floor and a staff. He was halfway through the story, giving her the credit when she reached over, put her hand flat on his forearm, and finished it herself. In her version, she had not arranged the dinner. She had closed it. Nobody at the table said anything. André laughed with everyone else. Nathan Reese, who had known him since they were 19 and broke, did not laugh and looked at his plate. That was also the night André first met Julian Voss, who was 36, who had a partner's title at a fund, and who told André twice how much he admired what Vanessa had built. Both times he said, Vanessa, not the company. There were things about the house that nobody outside the family thought about, and they were all sitting in plain sight that spring. The property at 1187 Kestrel Ridge did not belong to André Boyd on paper. It belonged to Meridian Residential Holdings, a company he had formed for it, and in 2016 he had put his wife's name on 30% of that company because his accountant had raised his eyebrows about estate exposure and because it had never once occurred to André to say no to her about anything. 3 years after that, a lawyer had drafted an amendment converting that 30% into a non-voting interest. André had signed it, filed it, and never looked at it again. Walter Grady, who had run the house for 14 years and who was the only person besides André with an administrator's code for the front gate, had been there for all of it. He had been there the day they moved in. And Amara, who turned 11 in March, had been given a camcorder for her birthday because she had asked for one specifically, an old-fashioned one that recorded to a card and had a screen that flipped out. She filmed everything. Pancakes, the dog next door, her father sleeping in a chair. Nobody thought about it at all. It ended on a Tuesday in April. Vanessa came home at 9 and did not take off her coat. She stood at the end of the kitchen island, the same island where he had read her magazine cover, and she told him about Julian in 11 sentences. She did not cry, and she did not apologize, and afterward André understood that she had rehearsed it, and that the rehearsal had been the merciful part. She said the marriage was finished. She said she had been finished for a while. She said she would send someone for her things. André did not raise his voice. He did not ask her a single question, which she seemed to find harder than shouting would have been. When she picked up her keys, he said only that he hoped she would drive carefully because it was raining, and then he stood in the kitchen beside the pan he had never turned off until he heard the gate close. Then he went upstairs and sat on the edge of his daughter's bed. Amara was awake. She had been awake the whole time, and she had not come down. He told her that her mother was going to be living somewhere else now, and that none of it was her fault, and that everything else in her life was going to stay exactly the way it was. He was reaching for the next sentence, the one about how her mother would still come and go from the house whenever she wanted, when Amara sat up. "Dad," she said, "are you about to tell me everything's normal?" He looked at her. "Because if you aren't," she said, "I'd rather you didn't." André did not answer her that night. He said goodnight, and he turned off her lamp, and he went downstairs and stood in his office in front of a framed piece of paper from 1997 that said the property at that address would be sold at public auction, and he thought about being 12 years old and about a man he had never met before or since putting a sticker on the front door of his mother's house while he watched from the yard. At 6 the next morning, he called Walter Grady into the office. He asked for the locks to be changed, all of them, and the gate codes regenerated, and every stored credential wiped from the system, housekeeping, the landscaping service, the pool company, all of it. He asked that new access be granted only by the owner in writing, and that Walter take instruction on the matter from no one else, no matter who asked or how they asked. Walter, who had watched 2 people carry boxes into an empty house 14 years earlier, took all of it down in a small notebook and asked one question. He asked what he should do if Mrs. Boyd came to the gate. "You don't open it," André said. "You call me." That afternoon, he sat with Amara at the keypad by the front gate and taught her a 6-digit code that belonged to nobody but her. He made her enter it 3 times. He told her not to write it down and not to give it to a friend as a joke. "What is it for?" she asked. "It's yours," he told her. "You're the only person in this house who gets to decide when this gate opens." She nodded like it was a small thing, the way children accept enormous things, and went inside to film the dog next door. There is a difference between the person who builds a house and the person who has only ever lived in one, and while the weather holds, that difference is almost invisible. It shows up in the storm. What André did not understand, yet what he would not understand for another 5 months, was that the storm does not care who was right. It only asks what you did, and it will hand your own reasons back to you sharpened. He had locked every door in the house. He had just handed his daughter the only key that mattered. The blue folder was thick, and Vanessa held it up long enough for the guests behind her to see it before she said anything at all. "Are you sure, André?" Her voice carried easily up to the balcony. "Are you sure you've actually read the paperwork on your own house?" 5 months had passed since the night she left in the rain, and in that time André had convinced himself of a simple thing, that the law was on his side, that this would be unpleasant and slow and eventually finished, and that the worst part was already behind him. He had never in his life been more wrong about anything, and the proof was in his wife's hands in a folder the color of a swimming pool. She opened it and began to read out loud. She read the amended and restated operating agreement of Meridian Residential Holdings, dated the 9th of June 2016, and the schedule of members attached to it, and her own name against 30%. She read the recording information for the deed, which showed the property at 1187 Kestrel Ridge, held not by André Boyd personally, but by that company. She read from a renovation contract dated 2019, $1.2 million in scope, signed by Vanessa Boyd and nobody else. Then she looked at the 2 investors standing behind her, the ones who had come for a client reception she had scheduled in the spring and had deliberately never canceled. "He didn't buy me a house," she said. "We built a company that owns a house, and I am 30% of that company, and I paid for 1/3 of what you're looking at. And this morning I couldn't get through my own front gate." Somebody in the crowd said something under their breath. André heard the shape of it more than the words, and he understood that the mood in the driveway had turned, and that it had not turned in his favor. Down at the keypad, Walter Grady kept his hands folded behind his back and did not move because those were his instructions, and because in 14 years he had never once made a decision in that driveway that was not his to make. André said nothing else. He went inside and closed the balcony door. 2 hours later, he sat in a conference room on the 19th floor of a building on West Peachtree, while Dana Whitfield read the same documents his wife had read to a crowd. Dana had been his attorney for 9 years. She had a habit of going completely still when something was wrong, and she went still on page 4. "The 2019 amendment," she said, "the one converting her interest to non-voting." He waited. "There's an acknowledgement block on the signature page. It was supposed to be notarized. Yours was, hers wasn't." André asked what that meant in plain language because he had learned a long time ago that lawyers would give you the careful version unless you asked. "It means her 30% may never have converted," Dana said. "It means that on paper right now your wife may still be a voting member of the company that owns your home, and it means she knows it because her attorney found it before I did." He drove home the long way. Not because he needed to think, but because he did not want to arrive at a house he was no longer certain of. What Vanessa did next was not loud, and that was what made it effective. She did not come back to the gate. Instead, there were letters, one a week, each one broader than the last, each one demanding books and records and accountings for a company André had built with his own hands. There were phone calls to people who had never heard from her before, and after each call, those people were slightly cooler with him in the particular way of money that has begun to consider its exposure. In the second week of October, she wrote a post that went up on a Sunday evening. It was not vicious. It was worse than vicious. It was reasonable. It described a woman who had spent 14 years being written out of a story she had helped write, who had funded a home she was now locked out of, who had introduced a man to the people who made him rich, and then been told politely and repeatedly that she was a guest in what she had built. It never used the word cruel. It let the reader arrive there alone. By Tuesday, it had been shared 11,000 times. On Wednesday, Grant Halloran called. The Hallorans had been the first institution to put real money behind Boyd Meridian back in 2017, after a dinner Vanessa had spent a week preparing for, and Grant had a voice like a handshake and had never once in 9 years been anything but warm. He was not cold on that call. He was careful which was worse. He said that his sister-in-law had sent him the post. He said that he was not asking André to explain himself. Then he asked whether there was anything about the ownership structure at Kestrel Ridge that he ought to understand before the group committed the remaining capital on the West Side project, and André heard very clearly a door being tested from the other side. That Thursday evening, Amara had a fall performance at school. She played third chair in a string ensemble and had spent 4 weeks preparing 11 bars of something by a composer André could not pronounce. He turned off his phone in the parking lot and left it in the car. For 90 minutes, he sat in a folding chair in a gymnasium under bad lighting between a woman who filmed everything and a man who fell asleep and watched his daughter play 11 bars without a single mistake. Afterward, she came out with her hair coming loose and asked if they could get milkshakes, and they did, and she talked the entire way home about a girl in her class who had bribed the percussion section with candy. He would think about that evening many times in the months afterward. Not because anything happened, because it was the last night of that year when nothing did. The court's answer came in early November, and for about 4 days, it looked like the end of it. Dana had moved for an order preserving the status quo, and a judge in Fulton County signed it, pending resolution of the ownership dispute. No member of Meridian Residential Holdings would take unilateral possession of the property, and no party would enter it except by agreement or by further order of the court. In practical terms, Vanessa could not come through the gate. Nathan Reese brought champagne to the house that night. He had appointed himself without discussion the person whose job was to make André celebrate things. He got 2 glasses out of the cabinet. André took his and set it down on the counter without drinking. "You won," Nathan said. "I got 4 days," André said. "She'll be back." Nathan poured his own anyway and looked around the kitchen at the stone Vanessa had chosen and the light fixtures in the stairwell he had once made fun of. He asked eventually the question he had come to ask, which was whether André had thought about simply writing a check large enough to end it. André had thought about it. He had thought about it on the drive home from Dana's office and again at 3 in the morning more times than he wanted to admit, and each time he came back to the same wall in himself and could not get past it. He tried to explain it and did not do it well. He said that if he paid her to leave the house alone, then the house had a price, and if it had a price, it had always had one. And then the 12-year-old who had watched a stranger paper his mother's front door had been right about the world all along. Nathan listened and did not argue and finished his champagne alone. Upstairs at 10:40, Amara's phone rang, and it was her mother. She took the call sitting on her bedroom floor with her back against the bed. Vanessa cried. She said she was sorry, and that she had made a mess of everything, and that she missed her, and that none of what was happening was about her, and Amara said the things an 11-year-old says, which are mostly the word okay, in different tones of voice. At the end, her mother asked her not to mention that she had called because it might make trouble with the lawyers. Amara said okay to that too. Then she hung up and sat there for a while and did not tell her father, and the not telling sat in her chest like a swallowed stone for the next 4 weeks. The mediation was scheduled for the 2nd of December in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building André had helped finance in 2021, which he understood was a coincidence and which felt like a joke anyway. He came prepared. He and Dana had spent 11 days assembling it, the wire records for the original purchase, every dollar traced from a Boyd Meridian distribution account with nothing of Vessel and Company's in it. The construction file, the permits, the draws, the inspection reports, all of it in his name, because he had walked that site personally 3 times a week for 9 months in 2011. 14 years of tax filings, insurance, every mortgage payment, all of them from his side. Vanessa arrived with Miriam Stroud, who was 61, who had done family work in Atlanta for 30 years, and who set one thin folder on the table and did not open it. For an hour, André's side did all the talking, and it went as well as anything in his life ever had. Dana walked through the money in a flat voice page by page, and by the end of the hour the mediator had stopped taking notes and was just listening, and Vanessa was looking down at the table, and André felt something in his chest begin very cautiously to unclench. There were about 3 seconds in that room where every person in it believed it was over. Then Miriam Stroud opened her folder. She addressed the mediator, not André, and she made 2 points. The first was the amendment. She had the original in a sleeve and she passed it across, and she noted that the acknowledgement for Vanessa Boyd's signature bore no notary seal, no commission number, and no date, and that in her office's view, the conversion of her client's interest had never been validly executed, which meant she said that Vanessa Boyd remained a 30% voting member of the company that held title to the property, and that everything André's counsel had spent an hour proving, every wire, every permit, every payment, was a description of how one member had funded an asset the company owned and not a description of who owned it. Dana had known that was coming. She had told him it was coming. The second thing she had not known. Miriam Stroud slid a second document across the table face up and said that her client had that morning filed a petition in Fulton County Superior Court for primary physical and legal custody of the minor child. André read the caption twice before the words assembled into meaning. He read the allegations more slowly. They said that the father had immediately following the separation unilaterally excluded the mother from the marital residence, that he had changed every lock and every access code in the home without notice or agreement, that he had instructed household staff to refuse the mother entry and to report her arrival to him, that the child had been placed in the middle of an access dispute and made a witness to a confrontation at the property in September in front of a dozen adults, that the pattern demonstrated an intent to isolate the child from her mother and to use control of the home as leverage, and that the environment was, in the language of the petition, unstable. Every fact in it was true. That was the part he could not get around sitting in that conference room with his hands flat on the table. He had changed the locks. He had told Walter to call him. He had done all of it in one morning, 6 hours after his daughter asked him not to lie to her, and he had done it because of a piece of paper that had gone up on a door when he was 12 years old. Vanessa looked up at him for the first time since the hour began. She did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had been handed a weapon and had decided somewhere around 3 in the morning to use it. "I want my daughter," she said. There is a particular cruelty in the way the world handles the things people do to protect what they love. It does not examine the reason. It only reads the act, and it reads it out loud in a room full of strangers in language you would never have chosen. André had spent his whole adult life making sure no one could ever take a house from him again, and it had taken his wife's attorney about 90 seconds to turn every lock in that house into evidence. The investigator came on the 11th of December. Her name was Gwen Marsh, and she was polite and thorough and impossible to read, and she spent 2 hours and 40 minutes in the house. She looked at Amara's room. She opened the refrigerator. She asked about school and about routines and about who cooked. She asked André whether he had discussed the litigation with his daughter, and he said only in general terms, and she wrote that down, and he could not tell whether writing it down was good or bad. She interviewed Amara alone for 35 minutes with the door shut. She interviewed Walter Grady for 20. Afterward, André asked Walter what she had wanted to know, and Walter said in the tone of a man reporting the weather that she had wanted to know who gave the order about the gate and when and whether it had ever been rescinded. The press found it 8 days later. Not the custody filing itself, which was sealed, but the shape of it. A local business site ran a piece about the ownership dispute at Kestrel Ridge and mentioned in the 4th paragraph that a custody matter was also pending. From there, it went where those things go. By the end of December, a photograph of the front gate taken through the windshield of somebody's car had been seen more times than any building André had ever developed. The West Side project, which had been 90% committed, stalled. 2 lenders asked for updated personal financials. A partner André had worked with since 2018 sent a message that said in its entirety, "Thinking of you, brother," and then did not call. Miriam Stroud, meanwhile, was doing something clever with the renovation contract. She was not using it to prove ownership anymore. She had the amendment for that. She was using it for the custody case. $1.2 million paid personally in 2019 into the child's home. New windows in the child's bedroom, the stairwell, the safety glass around the pool. In her framing, it was not an investment, it was a mother's investment. And every line item became evidence of a woman who had put her own money into her daughter's house and had then been locked out of it by a man with a keypad. André read that filing in his office under the framed foreclosure notice and understood that he was losing. Walter Grady's deposition was on the 6th of January. They took it in a small room with a court reporter and a pitcher of water nobody touched. Miriam Stroud asked him how long he had worked for the family, and he said 14 years, and she asked him whether he remembered the day they moved in. He said he did. She asked him to describe it, and Dana objected to relevance, and the objection was noted, and Walter answered anyway because nobody had told him not to. He said that the house had been empty except for boxes stacked in the entry, and that Mr. Boyd had gone straight out to the mechanical room to look at something because that was what he did with a new building, and that Mrs. Boyd had stood alone in the middle of the front room with her arms out a little from her sides the way people do when a space is bigger than they expected, and had turned around twice slowly and had said something he had never forgotten. Miriam Stroud asked what she had said. "She said I'm going to grow old in this house." The reporter's keys clicked and stopped. Vanessa, sitting at the end of the table, put her hand over her mouth and did not take it away for some time. Miriam Stroud asked the next question, which was about the gate order, and Walter answered it exactly and without shading. He said that on the morning after Mrs. Boyd left, Mr. Boyd had instructed him to change all locks and codes, to grant no access, except in writing from the owner, and to take instruction from no one else. He said that he had asked what to do if Mrs. Boyd came to the gate, and had been told not to open it and to call. He said the order had never been rescinded. Afterward, in the parking deck, Walter stood by André's car and would not get in for a minute. "You should know," he said, "that I'm not on your side." André looked at him. "I've been in that house longer than either of you have been unhappy in it," Walter said. "I'm on the side of the house, and the house needs that little girl in it. So whatever you're planning to do next, do it with that in mind, because I'll be answering questions again in March. And I'm not going to lie for you." He got in the car. They did not talk on the drive back. Vanessa came to the gate for the second time on the 17th of January at 7 in the evening in the rain. She came alone. No attorney, no Julian, no camera, no audience. She left her car at the bottom of the drive and walked up to the keypad and did not touch it, and she stood there in a coat that was not made for that weather and called her daughter's name. Walter reached the intercom first and called upstairs. André came down to the entry and stopped at the glass beside the front door, where he could see her small and lit badly by the gate lamp, and he told Walter in a voice with nothing in it at all that they were not opening the gate. There was a court order. There was a pending petition. There was a lawyer who had told him twice that week that the single worst thing he could do was permit an unsupervised contact he could not document. Walter did not move toward the panel. He did not move away from it either. And Amara, who had come down the stairs behind her father, without either of them hearing her, walked past both of them out the front door, across 40 feet of wet driveway in her socks to the keypad on the inside post. André said her name. She entered 6 digits. The gate began to move, and the sound of it, that low mechanical drag he had heard 10,000 times, was the loudest thing in his life. Amara turned around and looked at her father through the rain, and her chin was doing the thing it did when she was about to cry and had decided not to. "She called me in November," she said. "She told me not to tell you. I didn't tell you for 4 weeks, and it made me feel like I was lying every single day." He started toward her, and she kept talking. "You said I was the only person in this house who gets to decide when the gate opens. So I'm deciding. I'm not keeping one more secret in this house for anybody." Vanessa did not rush in. That was the strange, awful mercy of it. She came up the driveway slowly and stopped 4 feet short of her daughter, and then she went down on her knees on the wet concrete and put her arms around her, and Amara held on to her mother's coat with both fists and cried in a way André had not heard since she was small. He stood in the doorway and did not go to them. It lasted 11 minutes. Vanessa did not come inside. She did not ask to. She kissed her daughter's forehead and stood and walked back down the drive and drove away, and Amara came back into the entry soaked to the knees and let her father wrap a towel around her and did not say another word that night. At 9 the next morning, Miriam Stroud's office filed a supplemental affidavit describing the events of the 17th of January. It did not accuse André of anything. It simply reported that on that evening, the mother had come to the residence alone unannounced and had been refused entry by the father, and that the 11-year-old child had unprompted opened the gate herself and gone out to her mother in the rain. Dana called him after she read it, and she did not sugar the assessment. She said that in a custody case, there was no piece of evidence more powerful than a child's spontaneous act, and that a judge who read that affidavit would not read it as a girl keeping a promise her father had made her. A judge would read it as a girl finding a way around him. Gwen Marsh's preliminary report was filed on the 29th of January. It was 11 pages, and it was scrupulously fair, and that was what made it unsurvivable. It found the home physically excellent, and the child well cared for, articulate, and closely bonded to her father. It also found that the child had been exposed to adult conflict, that access to the residence had been restricted in a manner that limited the mother's contact, and that the father's response to the separation reflected in the investigator's words a pattern of control over the physical environment that had not been adjusted as circumstances changed. It recommended a temporary schedule shifting primary physical custody to the mother pending final hearing. André read it twice, standing up in his office. 40 minutes later, Grant Halloran called and said that the family was going to step back from the West Side project. He was decent about it. He said it was not about the reporting, and then he said the word optics, and André stopped listening around then because he had heard the word optics from a man in 1997 too, wearing a different suit, meaning the same thing. That night, Dana came to the house at 9 o'clock and laid out the only path she could see. The custody case, she said, was not going to be won with deeds and wire transfers. It was going to be won by explaining the man, by putting on the stand a person who could account for why 6 hours after his wife left, he had changed every lock in a house, and the only honest account of that was a 12-year-old boy standing in a yard in 1997 while a stranger papered his mother's front door, and a family that slept in a motel on Fulton Industrial Boulevard for 5 weeks afterward, and a man who had gone on to check every door in every building he ever lived in every night for 29 years. She told him what opposing counsel would do with that. Miriam Stroud would not attack the story. She would embrace it. She would call it a compulsion. She would say kindly, in a voice full of sympathy, that a man who cannot stop checking locks at 41 because of something that happened when he was 12 is a man whose relationship with a house is not entirely healthy, and that the daughter has been living inside that relationship her whole life. So it's that, Dana said, or it's supervised weekends. André had spent 14 years turning down interviews. He had bought 3 copies of a magazine to keep in a drawer rather than say one sentence about himself in public. He had let his wife tell a room full of people that she had closed the Halloran deal and had smiled because being seen had never once seemed worth what it cost. He told Dana he needed the night. She left at 11. He turned off the kitchen lights and stood there for a long time with his hand on the counter. Then he went upstairs past the front door and the kitchen door and the slider to the pool deck and the side entrance by the garage, and he did not touch a single handle, and he lay down in his clothes on top of the bed. It was the first night in 29 years that he did not walk the house. Maybe the real strength was never in staying quiet. Maybe silence is only strength while it costs you nothing but pride, and the moment it starts costing somebody else, the moment it starts costing an 11-year-old girl standing barefoot in a driveway in the rain, it stops being restraint and becomes something closer to hiding. André had spent his whole life believing that a man who explains himself has already lost. He was about to find out what it costs to be right about that for too long. Nathan Reese came at 7 the next morning with coffee he had bought at a gas station because nothing else was open, and he found André sitting on the front steps in yesterday's clothes. They had a rule between them that went back to a dorm room with a broken radiator, and Nathan had given it to him first: never explain yourself while you're angry, because the explanation always comes out as an argument, and nobody ever believed a man who was arguing. "I've been telling you that for 22 years, Nathan said, handing him a cup. "So here's the rest of it, which I never had to say before. Don't stay quiet while somebody takes your kid." André drank the coffee. It was terrible. By 9, he was in Dana Whitfield's office, and by noon, Dana had 3 paralegals pulling every file Boyd Meridian had generated in 2019. What none of them knew was that Amara had already gone ahead of them. She had asked Walter Grady the day before to drive her to the county office where the woman with the notebook worked. She had not asked her father. She had brought the camcorder her father gave her when she turned 11 and the 2 memory cards she kept in a pencil case, and she had told Gwen Marsh that she wanted somebody to watch them. Gwen Marsh had accepted them, logged them, and filed her preliminary report the next morning before she had watched a minute of them. There were 11 months of footage on those cards, and the remarkable thing about all of it was how little happened. There was a man making pancakes badly. There was a man asleep in a chair with a site report open on his chest. There was a long, shaky, boring sequence filmed from a car window of that same man sitting on a bench outside a testing center for 2 hours because his daughter had a placement exam and had asked him not to come in. There was a birthday. There was a woman in a white coat, in a great many of them laughing, being filmed by a child who obviously adored her. And there was one clip 31 seconds long shot from the top of the stairs on a night in April of a man standing alone in a kitchen with his hand on a pan that had gone cold, not moving, not making a sound. The allegation had been isolation. 51 hours of a child's home movies covering the exact 11 months in question answered it more completely than any witness could have. The rest came apart quickly after that. Walter Grady gave a second statement and said without being asked twice that on the evening of the 17th of January, nobody had instructed the child to do anything that Mr. Boyd had in fact told her to stop, and that the girl had walked past both of them and entered the code herself because she had been given it 8 months earlier and told it was hers. And in a 2019 archive folder that had been backed up 3 times and opened by nobody, a paralegal found an email. It was from Vanessa, dated the 4th of March 2019, sent to André and copied to the lawyer who had drafted the amendment. In it, she asked clearly, in her own words at some length, that her interest in Meridian Residential Holdings be restructured so that it carried no voting rights and no management exposure. Because Vessel and Company was raising outside money that year, and she did not want a lender looking at her balance sheet and seeing a development company's risk attached to her name. The amendment had been her idea. The seal was missing. Her intention was not. The last piece nobody had to dig for at all. When the investors in Vessel and Company were listed in a filing that February, Julian Voss's fund was on the 3rd page for $2 million, dated 8 months before a magazine cover that said she had built all of it herself. The final hearing was on the 11th of March. It took 2 days, and by the end of the first afternoon, everyone in that courtroom could see where it was going. The court found that the 2019 amendment reflected the documented contemporaneous intent of both members despite the defective acknowledgement and reformed it accordingly. Vanessa's 30% stood as a non-voting economic interest to be appraised and bought out at fair value. Title to the property remained where it had always been. On the custody petition, the court declined it in a single paragraph and entered a joint arrangement with primary physical custody to the father and liberal unsupervised parenting time to the mother, and it noted for the record that the child was plainly loved by both of them. What happened afterward happened faster than the case had. The Hallorans were back inside a week, and Grant did not pretend it was anything other than what it was. He said he had gotten it wrong and asked what the West Side project still needed and wired it. 2 lenders quietly stopped asking for updated financials. On the other side, the same week ran downhill. When the Vessel and Company investor list circulated next to the cover line about building it all herself, 3 of the fund's limited partners asked for an independent audit, and the board agreed to it within 48 hours. Julian Voss's name came off the flagship lease guarantee on a Thursday and off the fund's website by the following Monday. He did not call her. He sent a letter through counsel, formally withdrawing from any personal involvement in her affairs, and after that he was simply gone the way that kind of man is always gone, having risked nothing at any point. She came back to the gate on the 9th of April at 4 in the afternoon in ordinary daylight. Walter called upstairs, and André came down and looked through the glass beside the front door and saw his wife standing at the bottom of the drive with a cardboard box in her arms and no car in the road behind her that belonged to anybody else. He went out and met her at the gate. He did not open it. She set the box down on the pavement and took out the only thing in it, which was a photograph in a plain frame, and she held it up so he could see it through the bars. It had been taken by a real estate agent 14 years earlier, the day they got the keys. Two people in front of an empty house standing too far apart because neither of them had understood yet that they were going to be in that picture forever. "I don't want the house," Vanessa said. "I want to go back to the woman in that picture and tell her to be careful." He asked her what she meant, and she told him. She said the money had come in 2019, and it had not made her happier. It had made her frightened, and that the only way she had found to manage being frightened was to keep telling everybody, including herself, that she had done it alone. She said that once you start saying a thing like that out loud, you cannot stop, because every person who repeats it back to you is holding a piece of you up, and if you correct even one of them, the whole thing comes down. She said she had watched him let her do it for 4 years, and she had hated him for letting her, which made no sense, and she had known it made no sense at the time. She said she filed for custody at 3 in the morning after Miriam Stroud told her it was the strongest position available, and that she had said yes without thinking about her daughter at all for about 90 seconds, and that she would be paying for those 90 seconds for the rest of her life. Then she asked whether there was any road back. André stood there for a while with his hands in his pockets, and what he felt was not triumph. It was something much closer to grief, because he could see the woman who had peeled an orange in a truck outside Marietta for 5 hours, and she was standing right in front of him, and she was not coming back, and neither of them could fix that by wanting to. He told her the truth. He said he did not hate her. He said he was not able to be married to her. He signed the divorce papers on the 19th of April in Dana's office, and he did not read them twice. Vanessa was there. When it was done, he told her that her time with Amara was hers, that he would never stand between them, that she should come to the school things and the birthdays and the ordinary Tuesdays, and that if she was ever late, he would not make it into anything. He said it plainly without generosity in his voice, because it was not generosity. It was the arrangement his daughter deserved. Then he drove home. Amara was waiting in the entry, and he put his hand on her shoulder, and the two of them walked into the house together, and behind them the gate swung shut on its own, the way it had 10,000 times before. The buyout closed that summer at an appraised value everyone lived with. The West Side project broke ground in September. A retraction ran on the business site that had first mentioned the custody matter 4 paragraphs long at the bottom of a page nobody read, which is how those things go. A year later, the house on Kestrel Ridge was quiet in a way it had not been in a long time. Boyd Meridian had opened a second office in Charlotte. In February, André had started a fund that paid tuition and housing costs for kids whose families had lost a home and for single fathers trying to finish a degree, and he had named it after an address in southwest Atlanta that had stopped existing as anything but a lot number in 1997. He had also, for the first time in his life, sat for an interview about it and had been bad at it and had done it anyway. Vessel and Company was a third the size it had been. Vanessa had sold the flagship and moved the whole operation into 1,100 square feet on the east side, and she made things now instead of appearing places. Twice a month she came up the drive to collect her daughter, and the gate opened for her, and the two of them went to get milkshakes and came back late, and Walter Grady always found some reason to be near the front of the house at the hour she was expected. Amara turned 12 and then almost 13. She still filmed everything. On a night in the middle of that second spring, André went around the house the way he had gone around every house he had ever slept in. Front door, kitchen door, the slider to the pool deck, the side entrance by the garage, 2 fingers a half turn waiting for the bolt. He finished in the office, which was where he always finished. The framed notice had hung on that wall for 14 years, a piece of paper from 1997 with an address on it and a date of public auction, and he had kept it there because he had believed for most of his adult life that a man needed to be reminded of what could be taken. He stood in front of it for a minute. Then he lifted it off the hook and put it in the bottom drawer of the desk on top of 3 copies of a magazine he had never once reread. He did not need it anymore. A house can be built with money, and a good enough lawyer can prove whose money it was. But nothing on paper has ever kept a home. That gets held together by the far less impressive work of showing up, of paying for what you broke, of letting people who hurt you keep the parts of your life they still have a right to. André Boyd had spent 29 years guarding a door because he was 12 years old and could not stop a stranger from putting a piece of paper on it. In the end, what saved him was not the lock. It was a girl who walked out barefoot into the rain because he had told her and meant it that she was the one who got to decide.